welcome back to her podcast, episode 4. I'm super excited to be here with a very special guest, my most special guest of all time, at least to me.
Wow.
It is my husband, Rico Cruz. He has been my husband for the past 5 years. My husband,
Is this not
my
Este
friend.
es tu día?
This is not Este es tu día. If you don't know, Este es tu día is my father's podcast. This is not Este es tu día. Is that what you signed up for?
I'm in the wrong room.
Oh, well, thank you. Anyway, now that you're here, though, can we talk a little bit? So Christine Kane is one of my favorite preachers, and she recently posted that she was going to be doing a series on marriage. And she mentioned something in the caption that resonated with me because she was like, it took me all this time to finally get my husband in front of the camera. I feel like that today, but I feel very successful because it only took me 5 years. And I've had you on camera a couple of times, but my husband really doesn't like to be on camera. But in keeping with the Valentine's Day spirit, in our last episode we spoke on Galentine's and we spoke on women friendships. I did think it would be a cool idea for us to share. We certainly don't know it all or have it all together, but we've been married at this point for 5 years, right? We have 3 kids, so we've been through various seasons of life where we've been through dating, being engaged, being married with no kids, being married with kids, and we've reached the 5-year mark. And I actually was reading recently that most couples don't make it past the 3-year mark. So in a sense, even though, it's nothing compared to the 25 or 30 or 40 years that a lot of my dad's friends and people that we know have reached, we've reached something pretty special, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so today we're going to talk about what we've learned. But I thought it would be cool for, if anybody doesn't know us or hasn't been following me for a long time and maybe hasn't heard, I think that when you go through different seasons, you talk about different things. So I think like when you and I were engaged, I did talk a lot about the story of how we met and things. But now, even in our own lives, we mostly just talk about our kids always. So let's talk a little bit about how we met. Let's tell the world about when you fell deeply and madly in love with me.
Okay. Yes. Well, just to recap, I wanted to address a few things, but I didn't want to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't really like being on camera. I feel like I've done it before and I've gotten negative reviews. I think people don't really understand my sense of humor, and they've certainly let me know that they don't understand it.
I think our audience here, sorry to interrupt, but I think our audience here will understand your sense of humor better. Because what my husband is referring to is we did a live one time with mostly older Spanish people, and they couldn't get his dry humor. They thought he was mean. But I think Gen Z and millennials understand dry humor.
I hope so. That's really the only humor that I know.
I know that. That, if we're getting into the topic of things that we've learned along the way, that was something I had to learn. Because even though I understood dry humor, like in theory, like on television, once it was like in my home all the time, I had to get used to it a little bit.
What is dry humor?
Humor in which the other person is dry? Am I right? Am I wrong? I don't know.
What?
Humor where the other person seems like they hate you, but they don't. They love you. They just have a dry humor.
No, I guess to me it doesn't seem like dry humor. It just seems like the way I am. But dry humor has been like basically what it's been told to me is like it's a very sort of like self-deprecating, sort of almost like loathsome humor. Like it isn't something that a lot of people respond to. A lot of people who are like you will respond to that though. So
I can definitely see that. And I see how a lot of even people in our youth ministry, they'll come up to us and they'll be like, I love how Rico preaches. I love how Rico is. And I'm like, I mean, I love how you are too. But I did have to learn that some of the comments, that was one thing that we had to get used to, because some of the comments that you would say sometimes would really throw me off. And I'd be like, wait,
what?
Does this guy, just things like that, like self-deprecating jokes, like, just very sarcasm in general.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't grow up in a sarcastic household, So my dad and my mom, neither one of them was sarcastic. My dad is a lot like me, where his jokes are very overt, they're very obvious, and he's kind of bubbly and just very friendly. And I'm like that. My mom would always tell me that I'm a lot like my dad. And then my mom, she was kind of she was very upright and very proper and but also very polite. And so it made them a very good pastoral couple, like growing up in that. But I really didn't ever know or date anybody like you. And that's one thing that I learned also, that when I met you, I stepped so far outside the type of person that I normally dated. And it ended up being so good for me, because I think I needed someone who didn't care as much what people thought. I think that's something that you bring to the table with your dry humor and your kind of not being so dependent on what other people say about you or think about you. So you brought that to the table. And you also didn't suck up to me at all. Like, you were one guy that I dated that, like, you were just not gonna do that. But not in a, and I want to clarify this, not in a mean guy way where you put me down. He never put me down. He never disrespected me in any way. He just wasn't as overt. And I, in the moment, kind of needed that, because when we met, and we can go back now to talking about how when we met and we started dating, I was already an executive at Segadores. I was already pastoring a lot of people. I had finished my career. I was making my own money. I was getting ready to live on my own. So it was a very different dynamic than where a lot of people meet. And you were in that point of your life.
Well, yeah, it is true. Like, I didn't really see, or like was blown away by, like, oh, she comes from like a powerful ministry. Her dad is the pastor. Like, to me, like, I didn't really notice that. Like, those things just didn't matter to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're the only person that I've dated that had that kind of, like, I guess, title or background. So even though it was new to me, like, it wasn't really something that, I guess, just the way I am, though, that I'm not really, I don't know. It's hard for me to, like, I guess, be impressed or be
Mm-hmm.
excited, in general, by things that are different. So I kind of just take them as they are,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the way I've been since the beginning. Like, I've never really, oh, but he's so and so or she's so and so. Like, I guess it just didn't matter to me. Um, but yeah, I just kind of saw you for who you were, not for, like, your title or, like, what you were doing.
Yeah, and I appreciated that. I appreciated that when Rico came to me, the first time he asked me out on a date, the second, third time, like right at the beginning, I felt that it was very genuinely because of my personality and the things that I had to say and our good, like, conversations, because that's one thing that I think we had from the onset that I noticed that was very different. That in the past, I sought after people who were going to. Okay, here's what I'm trying to say. I'm so purpose oriented and so goal oriented that I think in the past I sought people not for who they were inside. I think in my early 20s, I sought them for their, almost like for their LinkedIn profile. I was like, okay, this person's in worship and they're a leader and they can preach and they could do this. All right, they check off all my boxes. This is someone I can be with. But then we didn't have great chemistry between us. Whereas then I meet Rico and he doesn't check any of these professional boxes. And I don't say that to put you down, but
It's just
he's like,
funny.
I'm not into ministry. I don't want to be in ministry. That was something that God did with him along the way that I didn't pressure. God just, spoke to him separately. But you were like, I don't want to be in ministry. I'm not sure about, I'm not super impressed by your, like, it's not about what we're going to do in our lives, but it's about who we're going to be. But we had such a good connection and we had such good conversation.
Yeah, I remember you being, like, genuinely funny. Like, you were the only person, I guess, I dated
Mm-hmm.
that was funny, and I enjoyed our conversations, sure, but, like, I never really dated somebody that made me laugh. I always felt like I had to kind of, entertain, or I had to be the one to make people laugh, whether it be a crowd or whether it be my, like, significant other at the time. But um, But yeah, I remember that like caught my eye pretty quick. I was like, what? Like she has a pretty quick wit. That's not something like you see every other day. And yeah.
And I remember feeling like, wow, he lets me talk. Because since I since I was so attracted to a specific profile of guy, in my mind I'm thinking like we have to be a power couple like my mom and dad. And in my mom and dad's dynamic, my dad was the performer and my mom was more reserved and more quiet. So I think subconsciously I was looking for that. So I would look for guys that would dominate the conversation and overpower everything that was going on. So I in all of my past relationships, I felt like I had to dumb myself down, talk less, not make so many jokes, and just laugh at his jokes. But I noticed from as soon as
I've never heard
you
that
and
before.
things come out on the podcast.
Wow.
But I noticed as soon as you and I had a few dates that you would encourage me to talk more. You'd be like, okay, talk more about that. What do you think about that? Or like, what are your thoughts on this? And I'll be like, wow, like I had never been used to talking so much on a date rather than the other person. I feel like a lot of guys, they're kind of like, they're like peacocks, that they're just like, I'm here to show all my colors and see if she swoons and she's impressed. And I think a lot of girls have this learned behavior of, I'm here to be entertained. I'm here to make sure I swoon over him. If I don't swoon over him, or if I don't laugh at his jokes, or if I don't make him feel important, then, that I missed out because that's what he's looking for. And finding someone who genuinely was interested in what I had to say and thought I was funny was very different for me.
That's
Enjoyable.
interesting that you say that because I have spoken to people and they feel like they have to be that for someone else. And I think that has a lot to do with like the male, I guess, ego or construct that's kind of taken over right now. And I've had conversations even just with friends who are not really related to any church, who are just secular. And I understand a lot of like that dynamic because there seems to be this idea that as a man, you have to kind of do things to keep like your significant other like on the edge. You have to do things or like post things that kind of make her think, is he into me? Yeah, like, and while I do understand that and there's a certain like allure to that, I understand that as being a lot more harmful than helpful. Anybody who takes anyone seriously in a relationship isn't there to make them seem like I have other options. They should be there to make the person they're with seem like I'm with you,
Yeah,
if
I'm
this
choosing
doesn't work
you.
out.
You're not
Exactly.
an option.
If this doesn't work out, then it won't work out. But you shouldn't like seek options while you're with a person that you're telling them you're taking them serious, or at least you're showing the signs of serious. I don't know. I just feel like it has a lot to do with what's happening like in this day and age. And I don't think it's anything new. I think people have always thought this way. I just remember like even my dad making comments about things like that, and he was already married, like with my mom.
And they had
And I was
3
like,
kids
what?
already.
Yeah, and I was like, what are you saying? Like, this is your wife. So this isn't new, but I just think that once the next generation catches onto it, I think that they're without knowing sometimes or without practicing it, they're harming their relationship more than they're helping it. And I kind of just never been about that. I've always been kind of intentional with the people that I'm with, and always been very upfront. It sucks, and I'm sure there are exes out there who could vouch for this and agree with what I'm saying. But if you see something just not working out, you have to say it. You have to, you have to understand. You have to, I guess everybody has to kind of come to the realization that we're not here to waste each other's time if you're serious about the relationship. But
And I appreciated that of you so early on, because one thing that I could always say with Rico is that he was very, like, it wasn't about games. And even that threw me off. Like, at the beginning, I was like, okay, this guy, like, I text him and he just texts me back within a reasonable time frame. Like, I was so thrown off by that. So if you don't know about my story, I met Rico at a very difficult time in my life. Our first date was 1 month after my mom passed away, and we weren't looking to date. We were actually set up by my brother. Cause like I wasn't really in the headspace to date, but we were set up. A few people that knew us in our lives thought we would make a good couple. So we were set up, but it was a very turbulent time in my life, and we didn't make any long decisions at that point. I knew that it wouldn't be long term decisions at that point, but I found myself falling in love with this guy because of his just no games, it is what it is attitude. So you would be, it kind of reminds me of The Office when Kelly, so any Office fans out there, when Kelly's dating Daryl and she says, "What kind of guy just says what he means?" Like that was me with you, because you would be like, "I like you. Do you want to go out?" And I'll be like, wait, but, where are the games? Where's the playing around, like making me guess? And you were just like, "No, I like you. Like, let's go out." And then on the date, you'd be like, "I think you're funny. I think you're cute. Like, you want to go out again?" And it was so easy and so genuine. And I think part of that comes from finally being in a place. I think that comes from emotional maturity. And what I'm trying to say is I finally got to a place after playing a lot of games with other people. I didn't date a lot of people, but I played a lot of games with the people that I dated. I was done playing games. And I began to change the profile of the type of guy that I was looking for. And I stopped looking for things like, and this is the biggest advice I could give any young single girl listening: stop looking at the car, stop looking at the shoes, stop looking at the LinkedIn profile, and look at if this person is emotionally ready to not make you suffer. Because I instantly grew a trust with Rico that I've never had with anybody else, because I trusted that if he was no longer interested, he was going to tell me simply and plainly, "It's time to let it go." And I also trusted that when he told me he was serious because he had never given me a reason to distrust him before.
Well, I do feel like I feel like that sounds simple enough, but practically I feel like it's very difficult for people to do, kind of because they don't know what they want and they're trying to figure out what they want themselves, you know? So sometimes I think we get into relationships and we do it more as to discover if this is something that we want. And if it seems like something we don't want, we don't really know how to cut it off because we let it grow gradually.
Oh.
And I think people, especially guys, since they, might want this or want that, like, I think it is a little bit difficult for them to do that practically. Um, but in any case, yeah, it sounds nice here on the podcast, but practically, I think it's very emotionally impacting to be able to tell someone, okay, like my time here is done. But do you understand like what I'm saying?
Yeah, but do you feel like your honesty throughout set up a I feel like your honesty throughout set up a foundation that you could have been honest with me, and if it wasn't going where we thought it was, you could have said that because you started with honesty. So you could have ended with honesty.
Yeah, I mean, and then we did. Remember, we reached a point where it was that kind of simple where we did kind of separate for a little bit. But it wasn't like this giant drawn out conversation. It was something that happened, I felt like, very quickly. And we each knew like there wasn't no what if or maybe we just need some time. No, like I feel like we drove our own separate ways even that night, and we knew what had happened and we understood like, okay, you get me?
Yeah. So to catch everybody listening up, because I'm trying to be very aware of the fact that you and I being together for 5 years too, we know everything that we're talking about. But we did get to a point in our relationship. So we're fast forwarding now. We started dating. We dated for about 2 years. We got engaged, and in the engagement period, so much began to come out about where we want to live, what we want to do, what our lives are going to be about, who we're going to be. And I think that was such a good thing because we got into so many important conversations. Once we were fully committed to one another, we had a wedding date. We got into so many, not that you shouldn't have those conversations before, you should, but it just got so much more real. And we did get to the point where we're like, we don't know if this is going to work out. How was it on your end? Like, what were you thinking?
Well, I don't want people to misunderstand. We did have a lot of these conversations before we got engaged, but being engaged makes things move at a much different pace, and it brings out a lot to the surface. And I think that this is key because a lot of young people that I talk to, they're trying to figure out the hard questions right in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I feel like it drives people apart early on without them fully getting to know each other. I think that it was
Absolutely.
helpful that one, you and I were friends first. We
Mhm.
like were friends for a while. We saw kind of our different dynamic, and then yeah, that we got into a relationship and then eventually got engaged. But for me, like that period of time was very difficult because it did bring out certain things like to the light. I wanted to know if for sure being in ministry was something that I wanted to do. Um, I think that I was very sort of intimidated by ministry. I think that it was something that I wasn't really prepared for. I had never really gone to school for. So for me to all of a sudden, hear things like, "Oh, you might be the pastor, or you might be this," and um, that kind of really threw off like the dynamic I feel of the relationship because it was all of a sudden not really about you and me. It was about like you and me and all these roles that we're gonna play. And I
Mhm.
think that for someone like me who didn't really come from any sort of background like that, who didn't really come from a church background, period, um, it was something new and different. And I think that like I like to sure like I like change, but I like it gradually, and not
Mhm.
just see things happen so suddenly. So yeah, we did take some time apart, and throughout that process, I didn't really allow myself to kind of go crazy. That was a process for me where I really felt like the only answer and the only thing I could do was just look for God in that moment, and that's kind of where I had a little bit of a breakthrough. I remember randomly it being like in a parking lot, and it was something so simple. I was just like praying, and I understood, like something kind of clicked in my head, and it said, and it basically made me understand like I wasn't marrying someone with a ministry. I'm marrying someone, period.
Mhm.
And I think that had to be very clear. While I had never heard it that way and nobody had ever told it to me that way, I had to understand that like I was marrying like Vanessa. I wasn't marrying Vanessa and Segalores and all these other people attached to the organization. No, I was just simply marrying her. And I think that was something I needed to hear. Like whether God spoke that to me or the Holy Spirit like gave me that word a long time ago and it finally came out. I don't know, but I needed to understand that like it wasn't really about an organization, it was about a person.
Yeah. And for me, that time apart saved our marriage, I think, because what I learned most in that time apart is you cannot force your dreams, your wants, your desires. You just can't force them on the other person. So I think the mistake that I was making was I was really cool as we were, coming in and, and dating and like in our first dates, like I was very relaxed. I was very cool. And I think as soon as that engagement ring got on my finger, I started, and I think a lot of girls do this, and it's normal because you're seeking security. I started putting a lot of pressure on him. What's your job going to be? Define your job. How much money are you going to be making? Like, are we paying for this apartment? Are we not paying for this? Are we buying a house? Are we, and I was 25 when I got married. So I was like, so I'm having kids within the next 2 years, right? And I began to put all this
Goodness.
pressure on you. I look back now and I'm like, what the heck was wrong with me? The questions were right, but my dominance. So one thing that we learned, we went to a marriage seminar 1 year in, and it just reinforced what God began speaking to me in our engagement, which is that if one person in the relationship is dominant, the other person has to be submissive, and a submissive person can never truly love from freedom. A submissive person is loving from force. And I didn't realize that even though I am the woman and the girl in the relationship and I wanted you to lead, I wasn't letting you lead because of all the expectations I was putting on you. Because I would ask you a question, but I would want you to answer with the right movie, rom com, what I had seen in my mom and dad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, answer. And so that time apart was so important to me because what the Lord was speaking to me, I did the same thing. I didn't date anybody else. I wasn't out there, looking for dates. I wasn't, going crazy. I was really buckling down and looking for God and seeing why did this relationship that is so important to me, why didn't it make it? Why did we literally called off our wedding, guys? So our wedding was February 8th, 12th,
I don't
something like
remember the
that.
date.
It was February 2015, and we had sent out invitations, and we had to call our friends and family and tell them we are no longer getting married. And it was
and they were like,
super
"Oh, but you guys are still good,
embarrassing.
right?" Nope.
And we were like,
No,
nope. And
we're
we
not even
did this.
together anymore.
We did this in December. So we were getting married in February. And in December, we were like, we just like, this is not okay. But I'm so glad we did. Because even though we had to face that embarrassment, and even though, like, I know a lot of people who go through with the wedding just to not call it off. And if we would have gotten married then, we would have gotten married in the wrong headspace for getting married. Because I was being too dominant, and I was imposing too much on you, and you weren't sure yet what you wanted. So you weren't able to lead because, number one, I wasn't letting you, but also number two, you didn't know how. And in that time that we were apart, it was about a month and a half that we were apart. Like you said, God spoke to you and told you you're marrying a person, not a ministry. But he also spoke to you a lot of things about what you were going to do in your future. We've talked about that after. And he spoke to me and basically told me, I have given you a calling. I have given you a mandate. Don't worry about Rico's. Rico's your leader. You're not his. And it's not, and I want to mention this for all the feminists out there, it's not that my husband dominates me, because we don't believe in a dominant and a submissive in either one of us. We're equals in this relationship, but as equals, I have made the decision and he's made the decision according to what we believe to be true in the Bible for him to lead. You know, not to lead with dominance, not to lead with force, but to lead with influence. And when I started letting him do that, we actually ended up getting back together, but it was 100%. The whole dynamic was different. Like, there was less fights. It was so much easier. The wedding planning was a breeze. Like, everything changed.
Yeah, and I do remember our February date. It was outside, I think, the wedding, and it rained all day, 100%. Like, from the morning till the nighttime, it was raining all day, and I'm like, well, today would have been a bad day to get married.
Yep, and we were broken up on our wedding dates. I remember being in my apartment. I was living on my own at that time already, and I remember being in my apartment, just like super sad, looking out the window, being like, well, this would have been my wedding day, but instead I'm just home, sad, by myself.
I mean, but it turned out for the best.
It did.
I think that a lot of people would appreciate hearing this, because you eventually have to go back to the process and understand why it didn't work. And we definitely did. I think that we did individually, which I think is so important. Nobody can heal you.
Yes.
Nobody can, like, don't look to your your significant other, your partner, like, don't look for them to be your fulfillment. Like, that's not the way it's going to work. You're not going to get your fulfillment by the other person. If the other person themselves is looking for their own fulfillment and they're not 100% together, why should we expect them to be the rest of our 100%? It's just not going to work. I think being apart individually and coming back as healthier individuals, people who understand things at a different dynamic, I think that's what ultimately saved us from a lot of arguments. Well, we weren't really married at the time,
but I think that it saved the marriage that we're in now, because we had a dynamic shift.
Yeah, okay, I agree with that. But I do think, like, it helped us. That was the best thing that we could have done. It helped me not to, do the typical sad sorrow, I'm gonna go here with my friend and go stupid. It helped me just to focus on what God wanted me to do, and I think that that's so important and so key for that was what I needed at the time, and it sounds like that's what you needed too. So yeah,
I think that's a good place to take a little break. I'm gonna take a 5-minute break and come right back. Hi, I'm Vanessa Gracia Cruz, and I'd like to invite you to visit vanessagraciacruz.com to get connected with me and my ministry. There are free resources, Bible studies, and if you subscribe to our page, you'll get a lot of them directly to your inbox. Check it out. All right, and we're back. So we've talked about Rico and Vane pre-marriage. We talked about the beginning stages, and we talked about what was actually, at the time I would have said, I was going to say one of the most difficult things in our relationship. I think at the time I would have said that, but I think now, now that we've gone through sleep training and having full children and pregnancy and all of that and postpartum and everything, it doesn't seem as difficult. But at the time, it was the most difficult thing we had been through. But now we're going to zero in on marriage. So we each brought some things that we've learned from our marriage. And what if we just share like one, you go, and then I'll go. And then, so why don't you go first?
Okay. Well, recently I think that we've had a lot of conversations where even though you're married, you will never really have 100% understanding on the other person. I think that like you learn that as time goes on. You learn how the person, like how your spouse is. You learn different things about them and kind of your approach and how you should be. And one of the things that had saved me a lot was I needed to get a lot better at listening to your frustrations, the things that upset you. And sometimes I just needed to understand that this wasn't something that I needed to necessarily solve. This was just something that I needed to listen to. So I've pretty much asked myself this question, and I got this from Ben Shapiro. But it has done a lot of good for me. It has done a lot of good because I have the habit of listening to you vent and wanting to give you like solutions. So you would come home frustrated, and I'd just be like, well, you should probably like stay away from that person. And you know, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense for me to even say things like that. So I had to ask myself, is this a listening problem or is this a fix-it problem? And most of the time, what I've learned is that my wife just wants to vent and just let it out. This isn't something for me to solve. This isn't something for me to fix. She just wants to know that she can communicate things without someone, you know, wanting to fix it. And I think as guys, that's difficult.
Yeah.
Because we genuinely want to like kind of get it over with. And what? That's true.
Okay.
That's 100% true. Guys, typically, we just want it to, okay, can I just keep doing what I was doing, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And we want to fix it as quick as possible. When guys talk to each other, they come up with solutions for what's frustrating them immediately on the spot. And no, but you should do this, but you should do that. Yeah, that's true. Okay, yeah, I'll try to do that next time.
Go back to playing video games.
And that's it. Yeah, like we don't, there's not a lot of like, it's the wrong way to say it, but like we don't, we don't waste time is what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had to definitely learn that. Do you feel like that has been beneficial to you?
Yes. And I definitely, I saw the switch when you learned, I want to say it was like maybe 3 years in, where you learned, and sometimes you even ask me, like, do you want a solution or are you just venting? And, you know, that's when I kind of realized, oh, wait, I didn't let him know what I was looking for with this conversation, because that's something that I've tried to get better at. As a woman, let your partner know what you're looking for. So sometimes, and I hope I've gotten better at this, I let you know, hey, listen, I'm just going to vent for a few minutes. I need to vent. I came home from work. I had a bad day. I'm frustrated. I'm overwhelmed, but I am not going to leave my job. I do not need to drop my friends. I did not, it doesn't need to be that serious. I just need to vent, and nothing needs to change, because there are problems that, you just got to get them out. And I'm very much like that. I process. And so one of the things I'll add onto that is know how you process and know how the other person processes. I process information by talking it over with other people. I'm social. I'm in the social section of the Enneagram. I don't even fully understand the problem until I've been speaking it out with another person. My husband is 100% different. He internally processes. So when he's going to process something, he'll take a few days sometimes to figure it out. I'll never forget when I told you that I was pregnant with Levi. Finding out that we were pregnant with our first kid, my husband did not speak to me for 3 days.
Is that true?
Yes. You spoke to me the normal, like, pass the toothpaste? Did you get that from the thing? But you did not actually engage in conversation with me for 3 days. But I knew you by then. And I
That
knew
seems
like
like it,
you
yeah.
had gotten big news. And that's happened every time we've gotten big news, or, the times that you've gone through things in your family when someone's passed away or things like that. I know already he's not mad at me. He does not have a problem. I'm not going to pry this out of him. I need to give him his time. So for those 3 days, I'm going around. I'm super happy. Like, we received the news totally differently. I mean, I know you were happy. We had been trying to have a baby. So I knew he was happy, but I knew that he needed to get his head all the way around the news before he can start jumping for joy. I'm the opposite. I start jumping for joy the exact same second I start buying baby clothes. I started calling on my friends. And I think one thing that has helped us grow is letting the other person be the other person. And that's actually my first one on my notes. I let you process the way that you were processing while I went around being me. And you also let me be me. You didn't tell me, hey, don't call anybody, don't tell anybody, don't. You knew that in order for me to really feel excited and enjoy this moment, you knew that I needed to do that. You knew that I needed to tell my sister, and I needed to tell my dad, and I needed to, I needed to celebrate, especially because we had been through 2 miscarriages.
Yeah, and I think well, one, yeah, I'm just not very control. Like, we're not very controlling people. I feel like we don't really control each other, and we
Mm-hmm.
don't really have like any sort of, you know, we just don't do that to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's been very key from the beginning. I've never wanted to like control your reactions or your emotions, or don't be excited about this. Like, that's just not me or necessary. But yeah, I will say this though, just in case there are guys like me, or sometimes girls like me, who are the more introverted type. Um, I will say this: sometimes when I get into those kind of moods, it comes dangerously close to being depressed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that that has to be like recognized, because yeah, some moments, and I'm not saying I got depressed when I found out I had a kid, because I don't think so. And even that's, I was like, what, is that true? Because while I see myself doing that, it wasn't really, I just didn't necessarily feel depressed, but I do understand that I take time to process things. And anytime there's a change, or especially a big change, it might not be something that I can show or talk about. It's usually something that I have to realize, and it might take me some time. But to be honest, that's just something that I feel. But I do remember when you were talking about like when my family passed away, that time I was
Yeah,
processing,
you
but
were
I can
sad.
recognize that I was genuinely depressed, and it happens. I think that that happens with grief and things that we kind of go through in those areas. But I had to eventually tell you. Remember, I did
Mm-hmm.
eventually speak to you and tell you like, no, this is bad. Like, I'm not well mentally, and that takes a lot. That takes a lot to say. That takes, you have to kind of be brave to say things like that,
Yeah.
because you hope that the other person will respond accordingly and isn't gonna punish you, or isn't gonna. And I think that that has a lot to do with like our own general sort of men's mental health and awareness. Like,
Yeah.
we genuinely have to be aware of that those things happen, and that while guys, we might not express ourselves the way you do, we might not start buying things on Amazon, or doing things the way you were doing them. I think that we have to be aware of our process, and I had to realize, wait a second, this is bad, or this is getting dangerously close to me
Too
thinking,
far.
yeah, this is way like getting ahead of itself. And we have to be aware of that. You shouldn't have a partner that you're intimidated to talk about things like this with. You should have a partner. I mean, and if you have the partner and you feel like, man, but I feel like I can't approach them about things like this, then I genuinely think that you guys should sit down and you should get it out there and say,
Yeah.
look, this is me. I understand that you're you, but I process things differently. And I hope that that person is as accepting and as gracious as you need them to be, because we're all different. And yeah, eventually though, I did get super excited about
Mm-hmm.
our kids, and even yeah, with the girls, I felt like that
It
was,
was a different thing. Yeah. The
yeah,
second
with the
time I
girls that
told
was
you
fine.
that we were having a baby, even though it was only 4.5 months after we had our first baby, so I was a little scared to even tell you. Um, it was different though, because yeah, I've noticed that about you, that you just you need to get your head around certain things, and I've learned to be respectful of that, and also to try to be a safe space for you. Because one thing that I'm hearing you say, and that I want to let, if there are any couples out there listening, or anybody who wants to share this with their significant other, you need to be your significant other's safe space. You need to be a safe space for them to go. They need to be able to feel like they can bring things to you without triggering every emotional response possible. I had to learn that because I am so emotional, and I have quick feelings and big feelings about everything. So at the beginning, Rico would bring things to me, and even if he was just processing and working it out, I'd either get angry. I'd be like, "What do you mean you're not sure about having a baby? What do you mean you're not excited? What do you mean?" Like that would have been me in the beginning. Whereas now I know that I need to listen, and I need to be still, because a safe space is not a turbulent space. A safe space, anybody, if you try to think of a safe space that you can think of, it was a place of peace and a place of calm. And you've also learned to be that for me, because I know at the beginning I used to feel like maybe I would get judged if I would tell you certain things, and it wasn't so much you as much as it was me. But you over the years have reassured me time and time again that I can go to you without judgment, without you pushing me away, but just you're going to listen. And I think that that does go in a big sense back to our roots in friendship. I don't want to speak for you, but I know that I was already attracted to you when we were friends, but I made that conscious decision not to really make a move until a few months in, so that we could kind of develop that friendship. And even when we were dating, because I think sometimes people hear to start off as friendship and they're like, "Oh no, but we've already been on 2 dates." Okay, but you can still have a friendship like rapport, and you can still be friends with that person. Even married, you can begin to build a friendship, because it's not so much about, okay, it's only friendship, but do things with your significant other, do things with your husband, do things with your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, that you would do with a friend. And if you are dating, if you're married, it's a little late, but if you are dating and you realize that it just doesn't feel like you're doing them with a friend, if it always feels like a formal date, that's something to look at, because at the end of the day, the dating does end. We still go on dates, but even our dates now, they're so much more like hanging out with a friend, because you're with this person all the time. So if with your significant other, if you're dating right now and you're listening to this, and with your significant other, it's so formal, and it just like, it feels like if I step the wrong way, we're going to fight, or if we do this, or reconsider, consider taking some time off like we did. Because one thing I've learned, and I've learned this not so much even from us, but from counseling so many other couples, is that we ignore a lot of things. We as human beings ignore a lot of things when we're trying to accomplish something. So when we're trying to get married, when we want to win that person over, when we want to get engaged, and then we find ourselves in a marriage where we didn't consider what needed to be considered. And I thank God that that wasn't the case for us. I think our breakup helped us a lot. But I do see people doing that, and I want to encourage you not to do that. Don't be afraid to reconsider. If your relationship is a good relationship, it will withstand your critical thinking. If your relationship is a good relationship, you should be able to poke some holes in it and see if it survives. And I don't mean poke holes on it like be self-sabotaging, but poke holes in it as much as ask questions, ask your friends, ask your parents.
Yeah, I think that well, one, yeah, I 100% agree. I do think though that well, in general, I think a lot of people avoid pain, and if you're gonna be serious about a relationship, don't be so afraid of pain that you're gonna ignore your basic needs. And while it will be a process, and while it will be painful, I do think though that at the end of the day, if you end up gaining a lot more knowledge about yourself, then I think the pain is worth it. Because at the end of our process, while yes, it was painful, I understood myself more than I knew. Like I understood, wait a second, this is what I was looking for. This is what I needed. I didn't really know how to say that while in a relationship, because you're in the relationship. It's hard for
Mm-hmm.
you to try and figure things out. But that was what I needed most. I needed some time to pause and to reflect. And some people, the best thing they could probably do for their relationship, hopefully not your marriage, but for their relationship, is to just take a break.
Yeah.
Not something like, okay, well, I'm going to start dating other people. Like, no, slow down. Learn more about yourself before you start dating someone else, or you're going to jump back into the same rhythm. And you're going to start looking for things in that other person and that you think you need. And instead of reflecting on the relationship you left, you're going to start looking for the things that person couldn't fulfill in the new person. And I feel like that is, you're punishing yourself more than you're helping yourself.
100%.
So, I don't know how much time you have left, but I did want to say one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
And one, it's that I did notice in the beginning, and still now, that I tend to think about things 100% logically,
Yeah.
and you tend to think about things emotionally. And while, like, sure, that's fine, we each have our yin and our yang, I do think, though, that we have to bend sometimes and try and see things from the other person's perspective more than our own.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that I needed to get better at, because I would constantly see things logically. Well, this person is frustrating me and I'm in this situation and that. Well, why are you with that person? Like don't spend time with them. Like da da da.
Like,
Or
they're my disciple, though.
yeah, and I'd be like, well, that doesn't matter. Put them in another thing, or um but I needed to start thinking about things for the way they were bothering you, not for how I could fix it from bothering you.
Mm-hmm.
And since I think so logically, I kind of solve my own issues, and like I don't think you'll ever hear about them, like that's just the way I am. I fix it. Something occurs to me, I address it, and like that's it. Or I need to speak to someone or confront somebody, I speak to them, and that's it. Like I
Mm-hmm.
kind of move
You
on
don't
from
need my
things
help
very quickly.
usually.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm like sort of self-sufficient in that area, but that's me. That's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily you. And that was difficult for me in the beginning because, like I said, like I kind of just want to get this over with. Can we get back to reality? Like I kind of just want to finish this movie, or like I kind of want to go back to like playing Call of Duty. Like, but it's this. That's something I think that needs to be said, because we were constantly like in this battle of logic,
Mm-hmm.
where I was 100% logic and she was emotions, and I needed to sort of ground myself and understand, wait a second. This isn't just about the issue. This is about the way the issue is making her feel.
Mm.
And that was what kind of needed to click, and I needed to understand, like, okay, um I can't be the only one that's like this. So I'm sure a lot of people would appreciate me saying that.
I would guess that it's probably 50-50 because I don't know the exact statistics, but I think it comes down to being introvert and being extrovert. Rico's an introvert, which the actual definition, I think a lot of people use it like on, in memes and stuff, but they don't realize that the actual definition of an introvert is someone who processes internally and who recharges by being alone. They recharge by themselves. An extrovert is someone who processes externally, so with other people, talking it out, being in a big group, and who recharges by being with people. So for me, resting, a restful Saturday for me is one where I go over and I'm hanging out with all my brothers and sisters, and, or I'm hanging out with all my friends and my friends' kids, and we're all just chilling, we're all together. That's not resting for my husband. And I think one thing I'll add on, yeah, that's not resting. And I had to learn that in you. So the same way that he had to learn not everything is all logic. I remember at the beginning of our marriage, I used to tell him, this does not make sense grammatically, but it makes sense emotionally. So bear with me, listeners. But I used to tell my husband, you cannot logic away my feelings. Because I would tell him how I felt, and he would say, well, there's no reason for you to feel that because of X, Y, Z. And I would say, yes, logically, you're right, but you can't logic away my feelings. In the same way Rico had to learn that he can't logic away my feelings, I had to learn to respect the differences between the way we express ourselves and the way we recharge. And so that made a big difference in our marriage too, when I began to say, okay, I understand that you need to rest. No one's coming over today. We are going to be alone in our house. And not only we're going to be alone in our house, but you're going to be alone in your room.
Perfect.
And I will be over here. And I used to take that as rejection at the beginning of our marriage. I used to be like, but why don't you want to hang out with me? But you've also learned to balance that out, and after a few hours to come out of your room and at least hang out a little bit.
Well,
we've
I don't want
gotten
people
really
to think
good.
that I'm just chilling in my room and
No,
you're
but
downstairs.
You're recharging by being by yourself.
Yeah, I do
And
find moments like, one, I don't generally do that during the daytime, for one. Like, two, I'll do that when you're like tired and you just want to go to sleep, and yeah, I will go spend time by myself, or I'll listen to something, or I'll watch a movie, or I'll play video games with the guys, and that's something that I think helps me. But yeah, I do remember specifically saying, like, do we have to do that today? Do I have to go? That's a big one.
yeah.
Do I have to go to that? Can you go by yourself?
And I've learned to sometimes go by myself. Sometimes it's okay to just go by
Sometimes.
myself. Sometimes, and that's where the give and take comes. Sometimes I'm like, you know what? I went to the last 3 by myself. You got to come to this one with me. Like you have to hang out with me a little
and I
bit.
won't say what,
You have to
because
spend some
I don't
time
want people to
with
get
me.
offended. But yeah,
But
most
it
of
never
the
has
time I'd
to
rather
do.
not go.
It never has to do with who the person is or where we're going, as much as it has to do with the fact that if you haven't had time to recharge that week, or if you haven't had time, it always has to do with how much time have you had to recharge. And in the same way, how much time have I had to recharge? Because sometimes the reason why I want to go out is because I need that communication, that interaction. I need those people for me to be recharged. And I think that's something very important. And we'll go ahead and we'll close with this. It's very important to know each other, and that starts with knowing yourself. If you have no self-awareness, if you have no self-knowledge, you can't have knowledge of the other person. So part of a healthy marriage is simply leaning back, getting to know yourself, observing yourself from an outside perspective, and saying, what do I really want? What do I really like? My emotions detached. What am I like? And how does my spouse differ from that in good ways and in bad? And learning to respect that in one another. So thank you so much for being on my podcast.
Mm-hmm. No problem.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next time.